They told everyone I had dementia, even faked a doctor's note. They wanted me in a nursery home so they could sell my house, my land, and my life. But I made one phone call that turned their plan into a public disaster they'll never live down. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. After Margaret passed, I started talking to the furniture. Not because I'd lost touch with reality, and not because I expected a reply, but because silence, real silence, is a predator. It does not sit quietly. It creeps. It coils. It waits for the moments when you forget you're alone and then sinks its teeth into your chest. After 50 years of shared breakfasts, evening walks, and quiet laughter over crossword puzzles, the absence of her voice didn't feel empty. It felt loud, unbearably loud. So yes, I talked to her chair. It was an old wingback recliner we found at a yard sale in 1972. Faded burgundy, one leg slightly uneven, the upholstery worn smooth from years of knitting sessions and just 10 more minutes with her novels. Every morning, I'd walk past it and say, "Morning, love." Every evening, I'd glance toward it during the news and murmur, "You'd hate this anchor, too." And on stormy nights, when the wind whipped around the old oak by the porch, I'd sit across from it and talk for a while. Not about anything important, just about the garden, the mail, how the tomatoes were ripening slow this year. The house, which once throbbed with her energy, now echoed like a museum of memories. Margaret left everything in order. That was her way. A note by the fridge that read, "Buy more mint for the iced tea," even though she never got the chance to brew the next batch. A laundry basket half full with her cardigan draped over the side. The last grocery list she wrote still hung by a magnet on the fridge. Eggs, sugar, green tea, lemon biscuits, birdseed. I left it there. Still do. She used to feed the cardinals every Sunday morning, claimed they were sentries, watchers from the beyond. She never said that out loud, not in so many words, but I knew what she meant. Since she passed, I keep the feeder filled. And when they gather on the fence in the early light, I say, "You've got good timing, love." And I imagine she's nearby, brushing flour off her apron and humming some Sinatra tune. The kitchen hasn't changed. Same chipped counters. Same tile floor I laid with my own 2 hands in the fall of '84 while Margaret shouted from the hallway, "Measure twice, cut once," and laughed when I didn't listen. Her tea mug still sits beside the kettle, dark blue ceramic with a tiny chip on the lip. I rinse it out every few days. I don't use it. I just keep it clean, because she would have wanted it that way. Every Tuesday morning, I still buy the same brand of Earl Grey she liked. Box of 20, organic, a little overpriced now, but I never blink at the cost. I place it carefully in the pantry beside the unopened boxes from the weeks before. People would call it strange, maybe even sad. But it's not about tea. It's about presence, routine, a rhythm that doesn't know how to stop just because someone's heart has. I live on the edge of town, in a place most folks drive past on their way to somewhere faster, shinier, newer. A 2-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and creaky floorboards that Margaret always said gave the place character. We moved in on our 5th anniversary and never left. We raised 2 kids under that roof, planted a willow tree in the back when she lost the first baby, built the garden shed when Ryan turned 8 and wanted to be like Dad, and later, after the kids were grown, we turned the spare bedroom into her sewing room, where she made quilts for local shelters and baby clothes for every child born on our street. Now, the house is mine, solely mine, and it feels unnatural. Some nights I wander through it like a museum caretaker. I dust. I adjust picture frames. I sit at her sewing table and run my hand over the tape measure she wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet. Sometimes I'll sit at the dining table and set out 2 place settings out of habit, knife and fork on the right, napkin folded square, and only realize what I've done once I start serving dinner. But I wasn't lonely. Not at first. Grief isn't loneliness. Grief is its own beast, bigger, heavier, trickier. Loneliness is quiet and still. Grief is chaotic and cruel. Some days it wears Margaret's perfume and whispers in her voice. Other days, it drags you down so far that you forget to breathe. But I was managing. I was still mowing the lawn, still fixing the gutters, still walking to the farmer's market every Friday, waving to the same people who used to wave at the both of us. My hands still remembered how to work. My mind still remembered how to plan. The rhythms of living remained intact, even when my reason for living didn't. That's what my kids never understood. To them, losing a spouse meant I must be falling apart. They saw the untrimmed hedge and assumed I couldn't handle pruning shears. They saw me misplace my reading glasses and assumed early dementia. They saw me talking to her chair and assumed I believed she was in it. They didn't see a man honoring his past. They saw a man slipping. But I was not slipping. I was steady. Wounded, yes, but steady. And the fact that they refused to see that, refused to ask, refused to listen, refused to simply sit beside me and share a cup of her damn tea, is what turned sorrow into steel. Because when they came for my home, my land, and my dignity, they weren't rescuing a broken man. They were robbing a strong one. And soon they would regret believing otherwise. According to my children, grief and dementia looked the same on paper. To them, sadness was a symptom. Routine was pathology. Love, at least the kind that doesn't move on fast enough, was a malfunction. They never said it outright. No one ever does. But you can hear it in the pauses, in the tight-lipped smiles, in the way they look at you just a little too long, like they're measuring decline. It started subtle, little things. At first, I mistook it for concern. Amy would call in the evenings, always beginning with the same sing-song question. "Hi, Dad. Did you remember to eat dinner tonight?" Then she'd pause like she expected me to forget halfway through chewing. Ryan, ever the efficient one, began finishing my sentences more and more, especially when we were around other people. "I was just about to fix the gutter, I know, Dad. I already texted the roofer." It wasn't just impatience. It was a soft erasure, like my voice wasn't reliable enough to complete a thought. I told myself it was love, just dressed up as control. Kids worry. That's what they do. But then came the grocery incident. Amy stopped by on a Saturday morning, claiming she was in the neighborhood. I had just gotten back from the market, 3 bags of fresh produce on the counter, receipt still curled near the bananas. "Oh, Dad," she said, peering into the fridge, "you forgot to get eggs." I turned and pointed to the carton, front and center. She blinked. "Oh, I guess I missed it." But her tone didn't match the words. It was the kind of voice someone uses when they don't want to admit they're disappointed the evidence didn't line up. Next week she brought over a whiteboard, a magnetic one for the fridge. "Just to help keep track of things," she chirped, already scribbling milk, bread, garbage day in red marker. I didn't ask for it, didn't need it, but I didn't say no. Then slowly, things started to move. My winter coat disappeared from the hallway closet. Amy told me I must have put it somewhere unusual. I later found it under the guest bed, where I'd never stored a coat in my life. Ryan swapped my digital alarm clock with one of those oversized ones with giant red numbers and labeled buttons. Alarm, hour, minute. Easier this way, he said. I read that large displays help reduce nighttime confusion. Nighttime confusion. He said it so casually, like it was a normal thing to accuse your father of. Amy came over one afternoon and found me in the garage, reorganizing my tools. I was halfway through labeling a set of socket wrenches. Margaret used to do that, label things. It made her happy. "Dad," Amy said softly, almost like she was approaching a wild animal, "you already labeled those last month." "No," I replied, "I labeled the drill bits. These are different." She didn't argue, just gave me a long, pained smile and patted my shoulder like I'd just passed a memory test with a D-. The next week, the mail went missing. 3 days passed without delivery. I started to wonder if something had happened to the route. I even walked down the street to ask a neighbor if their mail had come. Turns out it had. All of it. Only mine hadn't. Then on the 4th day, Amy arrived with a bundle of opened envelopes. "They were in the wrong box," she claimed. "I thought I'd save you the trouble." But the envelopes weren't just opened. They were sorted. The credit card statement was clipped to a spreadsheet. The electric bill had notes written on it in Amy's handwriting. "I was just trying to help," she said. Then came the remote incident. The TV remote vanished for 2 full days. I checked the couch cushions, the kitchen drawer, even the trash. Finally, I gave up and watched the news on my phone. On the 3rd day, Ryan found it behind the toaster. "Must have slipped your mind," he said, smirking. "We all have our moments." But I hadn't touched the toaster that week, and I knew it. Still, I let it go. Because grief fogs your judgment. Because it's easier to question yourself than the people you raised. Because some part of you, the hopeful part, wants to believe your children are still trying to help, not subtly writing you out of your own life. But the cracks were forming. One night, I heard the printer in the study humming while I was in bed. I got up, curious. I hadn't used it in weeks. The screen glowed with a recently opened document. Signs of Cognitive Decline in Seniors, a guide for adult children. I turned off the printer without touching a thing. The next morning, the printer paper tray was empty. Amy started bringing friends over to meet Dad. A neighbor who worked as a nurse. A distant cousin who used to volunteer with seniors. They asked odd questions. "Do you cook for yourself every day, Mr. Hartman? How do you keep track of appointments?" One even glanced around my living room and asked, "Do you remember where you keep your medications?" I don't take any medications. Still, I smiled, played along, answered calmly. Because by then, I wasn't confused. I was watching. And once I began paying attention, I saw the pattern in full color. They weren't concerned. They were staging. They were rearranging my life, just subtly enough to look like I was doing it myself. And I knew, deep down, they weren't just planning for my future. They were positioning for it. Ryan chimed in, that smug baritone of his already slick with rehearsed concern. "We've been talking," he said, folding his arms across his polo shirt like he was chairing a board meeting, "and we think it's time for an evaluation." I blinked. "Evaluation? For what?" "You're forgetting things, Dad. Important things. It's not safe anymore." Amy sat beside him on the couch, lips pursed, nodding along like she was at a funeral she had planned. Her hands were folded on her lap, perfectly still. But the tremble in her foot, tapping just beneath the hem of her jeans, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't sudden. This was orchestrated. I'd just walked into the final act of a play that had been rehearsing for months. "I forget things," I said slowly, letting the words hang. "That's new." Amy cleared her throat. "It's not just that. You've been confused. You told me last week that Margaret planted lilies in the backyard. She never did. I stared at her. They're irises, I said flatly. Margaret hated lilies. We argued about it every spring. Oh, Amy blinked, clearly unprepared for resistance. Well, still, it's little things. Patterns. Ryan and I both agree. Do you? I asked, turning to Ryan. His jaw tensed. He didn't like being put on the spot without an audience, but he was always ready with the corporate lingo. You're not getting any younger, Dad. We're just trying to plan ahead. Be responsible. Responsible? That word had become his crutch. Ryan, the senior director of client infrastructure, whatever that meant, had been using responsible as a shield since he got caught siphoning funds from his college fraternity budget 20 years ago. They hushed it up, of course. Daddy made a few calls and it disappeared from his record. But I never forgot how confidently he lied to my face about it. They're exaggerating. It's not like I stole anything that mattered. He always believed stealing was fine, so long as you changed the paperwork first. Amy, on the other hand, learned her manipulation through performance. Star of her high school theater department, president of 3 campus clubs, married into money by 30. When that marriage collapsed, she wept on my porch for weeks, blaming everyone but herself, until I co-signed her second mortgage. Now she lived in a colonial she couldn't afford, smiling at wine tastings with people she couldn't stand, while quietly draining every Goodwill account I had left. When her third attempt at an organic candle business failed last spring, she started spending more time at my place. At first, I thought she was healing. Then I noticed the way she photographed my furniture, took notes from my insurance folders, and casually asked whether I'd ever thought about moving to somewhere quieter. Now I knew why. They weren't children. They were vultures. And what they wanted wasn't peace of mind. It was control. They're just going to ask you a few questions, Amy said, all sugar now. No big deal. It's more about documenting, not diagnosing. Think of it as a wellness check. The next week, they brought in Dr. Kessler, a friend of Amy's from her book club, though I doubted he'd ever read anything heavier than a wine label. Thin-wrist tortoiseshell glasses, loafers with no socks. He looked like he taught kombucha fermentation at a community college. When he arrived, he greeted me with a grin that smelled like cologne and insincerity. Mr. Teddy, he chirped, like I was a toddler at daycare. I stiffened. It's Theodore. Amy hovered in the doorway like a supervisor monitoring a difficult employee. Ryan stood in the kitchen, sipping sparkling water like he'd already filed the paperwork for my assets. Dr. Kessler unpacked a tiny clipboard and a stack of pre-printed tests from a fake leather bag that looked like it had been purchased on discount from a home decor shop, not a medical supplier. He began with the classics. Can you draw a clock showing the time as 10 past 11? I did. Not perfect. Hand shook a little from arthritis. But the time was clear. Minute hand, hour hand, all in place. He frowned. Interesting, he muttered, as if I'd drawn a flamingo instead of a clock face. Next. Name as many animals as you can that start with the letter B. Bear, beaver, bison, baboon, boar, butterfly, bluebird, bulldog, barracuda. 9. Clean. Quick. He nodded absently and only wrote down 5. Then he said, Now, Mr. Teddy, what's today's date? Tuesday, the 12th of March. He tapped his pen. Actually, it's the 13th. Not according to the calendar, by the front door. He chuckled, flipping a page without comment. For 10 minutes, he asked me questions fit for a preschooler. Simple math. The current president. My own name. I passed everyone. Still, when we reached the end, he gave me that same buttery smile and said, Well, thank you, sir. We'll be in touch. That's when I knew This wasn't a test. It was a setup. He wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for excuses. I stood to walk him out, and when I reached for the door, I caught Amy's reflection in the hallway mirror. She was already texting someone. Ryan was on the phone. I watched the future forming in their hands, digits being dialed, plans being finalized. And for the first time in my life, I felt the kind of clarity that comes before a storm. A week later, the call came. I was sitting on the back porch, coffee in one hand, pruning shears in the other, thinning the overgrowth around Margaret's rose bushes. The morning air smelled of wet soil and honeysuckle. For the first time in days, I felt steady, clear. My hands remembered the rhythm. My breath was calm. Even the birds seemed less suspicious of me. Then the phone rang. "Mr. Theodore Hartman?" a clipped voice asked. "Yes." "My name is Carl Price. I'm a representative from Morris, Denton, and Price, counsel for your daughter, Amy Dorsey. I'm calling to inform you that a petition has been filed on your behalf." That phrasing made my blood turn cold. "On my behalf?" "Yes, sir. A petition for full guardianship over your medical, financial, and legal decisions, citing recent evidence of cognitive decline. As per Louisiana revised statutes, the court has been presented with expert testimony and supporting documentation." I didn't hear the rest. Something inside me folded inward, like a slow, collapsing roof. He kept talking, mentioning court dates, references to imminent risk to self and property, in terms like probate jurisdiction, but all I could hear was Margaret's voice. From years ago, the day we signed the final deed to the land behind the house. "This place will outlive us both. Let's make sure it goes to someone who deserves it." They were trying to take it. All of it. The house, the accounts, the garden. Even the 10-acre plot I'd leased to Clay Mercer, a local rancher who'd been keeping goats and bees there for nearly a decade. We had a handshake lease, one I never felt the need to formalize. Clay brought me honey every summer, and in the fall he'd leave bundles of firewood at the foot of my porch without a word. That land wasn't just real estate, it was memory, trust, continuity, and they were calling it an asset at risk. I thanked the lawyer, hung up the phone with steady fingers, and walked inside. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I made a cup of tea, Margaret's brand. I even sat in her chair. Then I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my old Army folder, soft brown leather, worn at the corners, filled with the boring paperwork nobody in this family had ever cared to understand. Tax returns, deed records, the will. A file labeled trusts. Do not touch in red ink. And a copy of a letter I hadn't read in years. From my old friend Curtis Malone, JAG Corps, now a civil litigator out of Baton Rouge. We'd done each other favors over the decades. The kind of favors that don't leave paper trails. I made the call. "Curtis," I said when he picked up, "my kids just tried to euthanize me with paperwork." There was a pause. Then his voice dry as sandpaper. "Well, hell, that was stupid of them." That evening, I sat in the dark with only the glow of Margaret's old floor lamp and a legal pad in my lap. The plan. It started forming faster than I expected. Because this wasn't just a betrayal. It was theft. And worse, it was a betrayal made under the guise of protection. That made it cowardly. That made it personal. I made 3 lists. 1. What they think I don't know. That they opened a credit monitoring alert in my name last month. That Amy had filed for power of attorney in early February, but had it denied. That Ryan had already met with a transition realtor to value the home. That Dr. Kessler doesn't hold a valid license to practice in Louisiana. 2. What they forgot I still control. The original property deed from 1980, which names me sole trustee and prohibits sale or transfer without 2 witnesses of my choosing. The fireproof box in the attic. my military pension account, separate from the retirement account they tried to access. My connection to Curtis, the loyalty of every neighbor on this block who's known me longer than either of my children have been honest. 3. What I'm going to do. Collect witness affidavits. Discredit Dr. Kessler. Publicly. Dig out the photo albums, letters, and journals Margaret and I kept for 50 years and send digital scans to a trusted third party with instructions to go public if anything happens to me. Rewrite my will. Set a trap they won't see coming. I closed the pad, took a long, deep breath, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. They thought I was adrift, vulnerable, fogged with grief. But grief doesn't weaken you. It distills you. It strips away everything unneeded and shows you what's left. In the days that followed the lawyer's call, the house stopped feeling like a home. It started with the locks. One morning, I went to grab the spare key from under the porch rail, where it had lived for 42 years, and found it gone. I searched the whole area, checked under the pot, behind the stone. Nothing. When I asked Amy about it later that day, she blinked at me with that saccharine concern she wore like perfume. "Oh," she said, already walking into the kitchen. "I thought we agreed it was safer not to leave it outside anymore." "We didn't agree," I said, following her. "Well," she replied with a shrug, "we do now." She was baking, or pretending to. Flour on her hands, apron tied just so, like she was playing house with someone else's childhood. That afternoon, I went looking for the envelope of Margaret's medical records, the one she made me promise to keep in case her cancer ever returned. I kept it in the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk, in a folder labeled Private. It had been there since 2009. It was gone. When I confronted Ryan, he raised both palms like I'd accused him of murder. "I haven't touched your paperwork," he said before pausing. "But maybe Amy was just organizing. She said some of your filing wasn't efficient." Efficient. As if Margaret's handwritten notes on napkins and index cards, her final days cataloged in loops of blue ink, were some outdated inventory system to be modernized. Then came the tech. Ryan brought over a new smart speaker and set it up in the living room. "You'll love this, Dad," he said, with that salesman's gleam in his eye. "You just talk to it. It'll remind you of appointments, turn off the lights, play music. Simple." Simple. That word again. I unplugged it the moment he left. The next morning it was plugged back in. I didn't even hear them come in anymore. They had keys now, maybe copies of the one they took from the porch. I started keeping notes, not on paper. That was too easy for them to accidentally throw out. I carved tiny notches into the inside edge of my sock drawer each time something moved. Each time they walked in without knocking. Each time I heard footsteps where there should be none. The count reached 12 before anything truly exploded. It happened on a Friday. Ryan had taken the day off work. Amy came by mid-morning with her laptop and a fake smile. She said she wanted to go over upcoming doctor's visits, but something about the way she kept checking her phone made me suspicious. Around 2 p.m., I excused myself, claiming I needed a nap. I walked upstairs, shut my bedroom door, then waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then I crept back down the hallway and slipped into Margaret's sewing room. The old heat vent between the sewing room and living room was still uncovered. I knelt beside it, leaned in, and listened. At first, only the hum of the laptop and the occasional spoon clink in a teacup. Then Amy's voice, low but sharp. "We can't wait much longer," she whispered. Ryan replied, his tone clipped. "The court date is set. Once the judge sees Kessler's report, it's done. We get guardianship. Then we liquidate and divide assets." "Quiet," Amy hissed. "I told you not to say that word here." There was silence. Then Ryan again. Sorry. Look, the realtor's ready. She wants to list the house before spring. If we time it right, we can get it on the market before Dad even knows what's happening. My breath hitched, but I stayed silent. Not even a rustle. My hands curled into fists against the carpet. Amy exhaled hard. What about the rancher? What about him? He's leasing the back 10. We'll need him out before we sell. I'll draft a termination letter. Month-to-month agreement. He has no claim. Then quietly, almost too quiet. After that, we move him into the home. Suncrest already has a room waiting. I told them we'd be ready by mid-April. You're sure he won't fight it? Amy asked. Dad? Ryan scoffed. He still thinks we're trying to help him. We've just got to act before that damn lawyer friend of his gets wind. Once we're appointed guardians... Everything's ours, Amy finished. Everything's ours. I stayed crouched in that room for another full minute, letting it all settle. That was the moment. Not the legal petition, not the missing documents, not even the fake doctor. It was hearing my children whisper about turning my entire life into an estate sale before my body was even cold. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at Margaret's desk with the lamp turned low and made the next round of calls. To Curtis, to Clay, the rancher, to 3 of my oldest neighbors, all retired veterans who still owed me favors, to Pastor Joe, who agreed to meet with me Sunday night and sign a notarized affidavit. Then I opened a clean page in my leather notebook and wrote at the top, Stage 2, discredit, disarm, destroy. Because if they wanted a confused old man, then by the time this was done, they'd see just how dangerous a lucid one could be. That night, after I laid out the beginnings of Stage 2, I sat in the kitchen long after the kettle had gone cold. The house was dark except for the porch light, which I always left on. Margaret insisted on that. A home should never greet you in darkness, she'd say, even if it's just you walking through the door. She always had that kind of wisdom, quiet, gentle, but firm as a steel beam beneath the floorboards. I missed her the way a tree misses its roots when the ground shifts. The world could try to strip everything from me, but it couldn't take the echo of her voice in this house. I looked across the table at her chair, empty, still angled toward the window, where the light came through just right in the evenings. Her reading glasses were still in the drawer beneath it. I'd taken them out once or twice, cleaned the lenses, then set them back, because some objects should stay where they belong, even after the hands that use them are gone. That chair had seen so many versions of me. The man who came home with grease on his knuckles and sawdust in his hair. The man who once drove 200 miles in a thunderstorm to pick up a rare quilt pattern she saw in a magazine. The man who held her hand through chemo and learned how to tie scarves around her head in ways that made her feel like herself again. And the father. I remember Amy when she was small, 4 years old maybe. She had a tiny pink raincoat, and she refused to go anywhere without it, even in July. I used to lift her into the truck, and she'd giggle like it was a roller coaster. She used to draw pictures of our house with us standing outside it, me with arms wide, her holding a flower. I remember Ryan at 7, building a fort out of scrap wood and cursing when the hammer hit his thumb. I rushed out, ready to scold him, but Margaret stopped me at the door and said, "Let him figure out how to fix something he broke. That's the lesson." She was right, of course. She usually was. But now that same boy, now a man with a too-tight shirt and an empty smile, was plotting how to sell that same home for maximum yield per square foot. Where had they gone? Not the bodies. The bodies still sat on my couch, drank my coffee, and called me Dad. But the people I raised, the children who used to kiss Margaret's cheek and bring me drawings of stick figures with crooked smiles. Those people were gone, replaced by shapes that looked familiar but moved like strangers. I rose and walked to the bookshelf in the hallway, pulled out the photo album with the blue leather cover, the one Margaret called our real estate portfolio. A joke. It didn't hold properties. It held lives, birthdays, vacations, summer days in the sprinkler, Amy playing dress-up in Margaret's scarves, Ryan sleeping on my chest in the recliner, thumb in his mouth, head heavy and trusting. I traced my finger along the edge of one photo. Christmas, 1991. Amy was holding up the necklace I gave Margaret, silver with a tiny locket. Inside was a picture of all three of them. Margaret wore it until the very end. That locket now sat in my nightstand drawer, untouched, waiting. You never think you're going to have to defend your own life from your children. You imagine wolves at the door, strangers, outsiders, not the people you once rocked to sleep, not the ones who once cried when you left for work and laughed when you came back through the door, not the ones who made you feel like you mattered. Grief has many faces, but betrayal is its own kind of death. And when it comes from the blood you gave your life to protect, it doesn't stab. It dissolves. The sun began to rise before I noticed how long I'd been sitting there. A soft breeze drifted through the open window, and the curtains swayed gently, like they were waving goodbye to someone. I stood, walked to the back porch, and sat beside the rose bushes Margaret planted the year Amy was born. The petals had started to turn, faded pink softening into cream. Spring was coming. They wanted to uproot this place before then, sell it off in pieces, slice it into a transaction. But this wasn't just a house. It was Margaret's final footprint, my legacy, a memory made solid through walls, beams, and time. They were coming for it, and I was going to make sure they'd regret ever believing they could steal it from a man still very much alive. I didn't have to be loud. I just had to be clear. That was something Margaret always said when dealing with stubborn people. Don't fight them where they expect it. Move like water. Let them step into their own mess. So I moved like water. The first thing I did was stop reacting. I let Amy keep organizing my kitchen drawers. I let Ryan talk over me at dinner. I let the smart speaker stay plugged in. I even let them walk in and out of the house like they owned it. Because every day they acted like I was already gone, they made themselves look worse. They expected protest. They were preparing for resistance. What they didn't prepare for was silence, calm, control. And that's when they started slipping. Ryan came over with a printout labeled transition schedule, left it on the counter like a forgotten receipt. He'd highlighted dates for court order finalization, elder move team, and property listing assessment. I took a photo of it, then put it back exactly where he left it. Amy started visiting more often, but staying shorter. I overheard her on the phone once in the laundry room. I just need that letter from Kessler finalized. Yes, notarized. No, he doesn't need to see the full medical notes. It's just optics. I didn't confront her. Instead, I called Clay, the rancher. Would you be willing to swing by for a visit this week? I asked. Sure, he said. Everything all right? Not yet, but it will be. Clay came by that Thursday, dressed in boots and dust. I met him by the shed and handed him a sealed envelope. Hold on to this, I told him. If you don't hear from me by April 10th, open it, read it, act on it. He looked me in the eye and nodded. You got it. That was the thing about quiet men like Clay. They don't ask questions when they know the answers won't be pretty. Later that night, I made a second call. To Curtis. Tell me what you've got, I said. Enough, he replied. Your daughter's petition is a bluff. And that so-called doctor she used? No current license, no certification in geriatrics, and he's been cited twice for misrepresentation, once in 2019, once again last year. I smiled at the phone. Good, I said. Now I just need to give them the opportunity to humiliate themselves. I started setting little traps, not the kind with wires or cameras, the kind with words. I asked Amy if she could help me organize my financial records. She practically sprinted to the filing cabinet. Oh, Dad, of course. I'll put everything in labeled folders, color-coded if you want. I told her I'd leave it unlocked. I didn't. The next morning, the lock had been forced. A small dent just beneath the latch. The folder inside, my private pension, was missing. I called Curtis. Add theft of documents to the file, I said. We'll need that for the hearing. Then came the bait for Ryan. Over lunch, I casually mentioned that I was thinking of donating the back 10 acres of land to a veterans outreach program. It's time someone else got to use it, I said. No reason to let it just sit there. His reaction was immediate. He choked on his tea. Wait, you're giving it away? Thinking about it. You can't just do that, Dad. That's my land, I finished for him. He forced a chuckle. Right. Just saying. Big decisions like that might need some review. Just in case, you know? Something's off. There it was again. That veiled language. Just in case. For your protection. In your best interest. Words they used to cover what they were really doing. Tying a noose out of kindness. The final piece was public. Pastor Joe invited me to speak at the community gathering on a Sunday morning. Nothing major. Just a little reflection on aging, memory, and legacy. Amy and Ryan came. Front row. I stood before the room, steady, hands clasped loosely in front of me. I want to thank everyone who supported me this past year, I began. Losing Margaret left a hole no one can fill, but your kindness patched it enough to keep me standing. I glanced toward the front row. Amy gave a small, tight smile. Ryan stared at his shoes. I've learned that grief is not a weakness, and it is not confusion. It is clarity. Painful, yes, but clarifying. And in that clarity, I've come to understand that some of the people closest to us may only see value when something is gone. The air shifted. I'm proud to still live in the house my wife and I built. Proud to remember every nail, every brushstroke, every apple tree she planted. Proud to still pay my own bills, cook my own meals, and carry my own name. Amy looked away. Ryan stiffened. And I've taken steps, I continued, to ensure that no one can remove those things from me. Not by trickery, not by fraud, and not by pretending love when the goal is possession. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. Back home, I found the smart speaker unplugged, the spice rack reorganized, a family photo removed from the mantel. The final storm was coming. The courtroom would be the battleground. But stage 2 had worked. They weren't ahead anymore. They were scrambling, flailing, overconfident and underprepared. And I was ready. The key to real humiliation isn't yelling or fists or breaking glass. It's light. Just enough light in the right place, at the right time, to show the mold that's been growing in the dark. I didn't need to punish them myself. I just needed them to be seen, and the first person to shine a flashlight in their faces was someone they couldn't silence, Pastor Joe. It started with Sunday's sermon, only 3 days after my little community speech. The topic was deception in the name of love. It might as well have been called an open letter to Amy and Ryan. She spoke slowly, kindly, but with weight. How easy it is, she said, voice steady, to justify betrayal by saying it's for someone's own good. But when love becomes leverage and concern becomes control, we're no longer caretakers. We're thieves with permission slips. The congregation was silent. Then a few heads turned. Amy shifted in her seat. Her cheeks pinkened. Ryan tapped his shoe against the pew like it owed him money. But that was only the beginning. 2 days later, Curtis submitted a legal response to the court petition. It included Exhibits A through H. A notarized statement from Clay, confirming my cognitive clarity and written instructions for land management. A sworn affidavit from Pastor Joe, detailing her conversations with me, her observations, and her concerns about outside interference. A timeline showing multiple unauthorized entries into my home by Amy and Ryan. Screenshots from Amy's text exchanges, ones she accidentally backed up to my old iPad while helping me sync my devices. That included phrases like, "Just make sure he doesn't talk to that lawyer yet," and "We need him to act confused at the hearing." And finally, a printed statement from the Louisiana Medical Board confirming that Dr. Kessler had no active license, had been warned twice, and was currently under review for ethics violations. That document hit the courtroom like a brick through stained glass. I didn't even need to speak. Curtis did the talking. I just sat there with my hands folded, looking like what I truly was. A man betrayed, but patient. When the judge called Amy and Ryan to speak, things unraveled beautifully. Amy tried to cry. Not real tears, but practiced ones. The kind that start in the throat and never reach the eyes. "Your Honor, we were just trying to help our father. We were scared. He talks to himself. He forgets things. He's been different." Curtis handed over my journal entries, each one dated, each one showing complete recall of conversations, weather patterns, and meals from the last 6 months. "Do these seem like the writings of a man in cognitive decline?" he asked. Amy's mouth flapped. No words came out. Ryan stepped in. "He might have been lucid when he wrote those," he said quickly. "But that doesn't mean he's safe alone. You have to understand. He's impulsive. He told me he wanted to donate land without even consulting us." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Consulting you?" he asked. "Are you a legal stakeholder in the deed?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. I saw it. That tiny twitch in his eye. The way his fingers dug into his thigh beneath the table. Cracks, real ones. The hearing didn't end that day. It was continued for further review. But that didn't matter, because by the time we walked out of that courtroom, the truth had already been leaked. The town saw it. Amy and Ryan's friends saw it. Even their children saw it. The next time I went to the farmer's market, Mrs. Delaney from the post office handed me a sack of oranges and said, "You let me know if you need anything. Some of us still remember who built this town." And she wasn't alone. Calls came in. Cards arrived. Old friends dropped by. Nobody brought up the case directly. But the looks they gave Amy and Ryan whenever we crossed paths said it all. Shame is a strange punishment. It's quiet. It doesn't bruise the skin. But it can leave people feeling flayed alive. Amy stopped coming by altogether. Ryan tried to talk to me once in the grocery store parking lot. "This got out of hand, Dad. We didn't mean for it to get this far. You should have come to us first." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "You walked into my house and started measuring the floors. You don't come back from that." His jaw clenched. He turned and walked away, without buying anything. That night I found an envelope under my door. No name, just 3 words. "We were wrong." I didn't open it, because it wasn't guilt. It was strategy. They were realizing their scheme had collapsed in full view of everyone they wanted to impress. And that wasn't even the worst part for them. The worst part I was just getting started. The hearing reconvened 2 weeks later, and by then, everything had changed. Not for me. I was the same man who walked the same hallway, drank the same tea, and still spoke to Margaret's chair every night. But for Amy and Ryan, the world had turned colder. They walked into that courtroom with smaller steps, flatter smiles. The easy confidence they once wore like armor had been replaced by thin politeness and a nervous twitch of the eyes toward the gallery, toward the townspeople who had started whispering, because the story had gotten out. It wasn't headlines or articles. It didn't need to be. In towns like ours, betrayal moves faster than the mail. People who'd once nodded to my children on Main Street now crossed the street. Old family friends declined their invitations. Their kids were asked uncomfortable questions at school. They had been seen, and worse, they had been believed. But this day wasn't about whispers. This day was about ending it. The judge entered. Everyone rose. The room settled. Curtis stood first, calm and clear. Your Honor, before we begin, we'd like to submit an addendum to the court, a sworn statement notarized from one Dr. Leonard Kessler, the same man used by the petitioners to claim Mr. Hartman's cognitive decline. The judge accepted it. Flipped through. Curtis waited a beat. In that statement, Dr. Kessler admits that he was pressured to file a letter of incompetence after a 10-minute conversation in exchange for a promised professional favor from Ms. Amy Dorsey. Amy blanched. Ryan looked away. Curtis wasn't done. We also present a voice recording legally obtained of Ms. Dorsey and Mr. Ryan Hartman discussing the timing of Mr. Hartman's institutionalization and the liquidation of his property. The recording clearly states, quote, "We just need the guardianship before he figures it out." The judge listened. So did the room. You could hear every breath, every shift of fabric, every tick of the courthouse clock. Curtis looked at me. I gave a slight nod. He turned back to the judge. And finally, Your Honor, my client has prepared a personal statement. I stood. My knees cracked slightly, but my voice was firm. I never wanted this, I said. Not the court, not the papers, not the shame. But I've learned something important in all this. Grief does not make you weak. It makes you visible. And people who want what you have, they watch for that. I looked at Amy. She refused to meet my eyes. I looked at Ryan. His face was stone. I raised my children with my hands. I built the house they were raised in. I held their heads when they were sick and put food on the table when times were lean. I taught them how to be strong. I paused, and they used that strength to try to bury me before I died. The silence was total. I am not confused. I am not lost. I am not broken. I am old. That's it. I remember everything, and I will remember this for the rest of my life. The judge leaned forward, voice low. I've seen guardianship cases based on fear, even desperation. But this was strategy. Cold, premeditated manipulation. The court hereby rejects the petition for guardianship in full. He turned the page. Furthermore, based on evidence presented, this court will issue a temporary restraining order limiting the petitioners from entering Mr. Hartman's residence or engaging in any financial activity involving his name or estate. Amy gasped. Ryan opened his mouth. The judge raised his hand. This is not a debate. You may appeal, but I'd advise you to spend that time reconsidering your priorities. And just like that, it was over, but not done. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, clean, the world somehow brighter. Amy stormed ahead, keys in hand, pretending not to see me. Ryan tried once more. This was unnecessary, Dad. You could have talked to us. I looked at him, long and slow. Talk to you, I said. You planned my eviction before you asked how I was sleeping. He shook his head. We were trying to protect your legacy. No, I said. You were trying to take it. And then I reached into my coat pocket and handed him a folded letter. He frowned, opened it. It was the land transfer. To Clay. The back 10 acres, given permanently to his ranch and his Veterans Outreach Program. They're building a greenhouse, I said. For food security, education. Margaret would have liked that. Ryan's face twisted, not in anger, in helplessness, because he finally realized he couldn't undo it, couldn't twist it, couldn't spin it back in his favor. He walked away, shoulders tight, jaw locked. Amy didn't even look back. Back home, I sat on the porch, tea in hand, the last light of the afternoon stretching across the fields. Margaret's chair creaked beside me, an old sound, familiar and kind. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel cornered. I felt free.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.